You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 432.
Hello and welcome back once again to the Outdoors Station, and thanks for bearing with me as I didn't produce anything last week due, as I mentioned, to my daughter getting married. And yes, so that's it now. The daughters have left the building, which means this balances out the man being in the wrong all the time scale to just Rose and I. So I'm only slightly wrong some of the time. I think married people will understand that one. With the big event out of the way, that now leaves us to get on with all our projects, which are many. Building the new storeroom and studio for Backpacking Light and the new Outdoor Station studio, working out how to use this ride-on mower I've inherited with this house so I can cut the grass and then I can pitch the tents and start a whole pile of product and how-to videos. Plus, I want to get on with my next 120 mile, I'm going to do it lightweight this time, coast to coast, across Devon, along the Two Moors Way, the one that I had to delay last September because we were buying the house, etc. Followed by us both heading up to do the Sky Trail. I'd like to do that with Rose. Plus we have to attend various shows, either as a trader or a visitor, and possibly towards midsummer or something, end of summer, hopefully finishing off the Pennine Way with the dog. As a result of all this, plus the usual domestic stuff one has to deal with, this means that these podcasts may be a little more sporadic over coming months. So therefore, please make sure you plug into our many social media connections, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and of course our newsletter list, so I can keep you up to date with everything that's happening and send you photographs and links to videos and that sort of stuff. All of which, of course, can be found on the outdoorstation.co.uk website. And while you're there, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love some feedback, either on the podcasts or perhaps a direct email, to know if we're hitting the spot, how you're feeling about the stuff that we're doing, and if you're enjoying the information that we're putting out. Okay, now, many of you have asked in recent weeks, whatever happened to Mr. Andy Howell, he of the famous Must Be This Way blog? Well, I can confirm he is alive and kicking, and in fact will be setting off shortly on his 10th TGO Challenge crossing this May. Now, for those of you who don't know what the TGOC is, as we refer to it, it is a 200-mile walk west to east coast of Scotland, undertaken usually in the same time during the year by about 300 people, mainly to promote and support fellowship amongst backpackers. It's sponsored by TGO magazine and various other sponsors, and basically it's very unique. It certainly isn't a race. It is a gentle amble across the glories of Scotland, either high, low, or a bit of both. Now, he and I met in 2004 on our first crossing and have been great advocates for the event ever since. So I thought it was a good opportunity to catch up with him and see what differences 10 crossings make, and what advice, what words of wisdom he might have for any first-timers who will be setting out from the west coast of Scotland this coming May.
Well, I suppose, just remembering back to my first challenge, I didn't really know what to expect. And I remember starting off in the Knoydart on a lovely sunny day. I was feeling very fit, wanted to walk. I got off the ferry. Everybody else went into the pub, which I thought was a bit odd. And I just struck off into the hills. And within about 2 or 3 days, I was a day ahead of schedule. And so I didn't meet anybody else for the best part of a week. And if you'd have told me halfway through there that I would have done it again, I wouldn't have believed you. It was only when I took a rest day that I caught up with everybody else, or they caught up with me. And I realised that although this is a challenge, it's an outdoor challenge, it's also an event about camaraderie. It's a social event. And if you want to get the most out of it, you know, you need to plan something that has a bit of everything, a bit of isolation, a bit of adventure, but give yourself time to enjoy not only the landscape and the country, but the other people that you'll meet along the way and who you will be walking with.
I had a very similar start when I did my first as well. It was glorious weather, I seem to remember. And again, I started at Knoydart. It was absolutely beautiful. And so much so that I cracked on and did the first 2 days in one, enjoying the weather, the surroundings, and everything else that's going along with it, and left people behind straight away. Very, very similar to yourself. However, the following day, I remember walking down the side, I think it was Loch Beared, and I started off the day with terrible blisters because first I was carrying too much stuff. Secondly, I'd overheated. My feet were in a mess. And by the time I did the end, I think it's a 9-mile walk on the road for no other reason than naivety, my feet were in a mess, and I spent the rest of the challenge in pain, but like yourself, ahead of the wave until I was forced to stop due to the injury that I'd created for myself. And everybody else caught up with me, and I suddenly got the idea of what it was all about.
I think there is a terrible temptation to want to get across as fast as you can, that it's a bit of an ordeal, and that you must really push yourself to the limit. And I remember walking into Fort Augustus in the campsite on my first challenge and seeing this big guy at the end of the campsite who was cooking over a barbecue. And I thought, you're not on the challenge. But actually, he was one of the challenge vetters. And he just said to me, look, remember, you're on your holidays. And that's right. You're there to enjoy it. You're there to take in the landscape, to really understand the land that you're walking through. So, yeah, don't push through too fast. Give yourself time to appreciate all of it. You know, the social side, the landscape, the walking. There will be days when you walk through the pain barrier. There'll be days when you wake up the next morning feeling as stiff as ever. There'll be wonderful nights camping wild in the open. You know, I think the great thing about Scotland and the great thing about the challenge really is variety. And so just be attuned to that. Make sure you are ready to soak in the lovely, range of things and experiences that you'll get on this walk.
Well, certainly Rose says every time she does it, it is such a privilege to walk across a landscape and see the landscape change beneath your feet, the flora and the fauna, as much as the drama and the views. Yeah,
it was Rose that put my thoughts into words with similar sentiments. If you go walking in many parts of the world, in really big mountain ranges, for example, you'll see a change over a week or so. But very often, for day after day, you're walking through very similar landscape. One of the beautiful things about Scotland is that the landscape changes every couple of days, and it changes very remarkably. And you do feel you're walking from one landscape system, indeed often one weather system, into another one. But that variety is something very special. So Scotland is very much the star of the challenge itself. And I did the challenge really because I realised I hadn't done enough walking in Scotland, and I wanted to get to know it a bit and see how it worked across the different regions. And I think if you approach it in that vein, it will really reward you as a trip. And it does feel like a privilege to walk through this beautiful, wonderful, ever-changing landscape.
Certainly the advice I pass on to other people if they ever ask as regards trying not to push yourself too hard is, if you can, I mean, it's all down to obviously how you're feeling and weather conditions, but if you can start around 7 o'clock or slightly earlier, you get the best morning you could possibly get, and it allows you to finish sort of 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and you really can enjoy the camping, because the camping actually is a very, very unique experience there. And just over halfway through, it changes dramatically, and it becomes very edge of town again, almost, sort of from Tarfside onwards. You're not that far away. You're no longer wild. You've missed it by Tarfside. If you haven't enjoyed the camping by Tarfside or by Braemar or Ballater, then you've missed possibly the best camping you're ever going to experience.
I think there's a couple of really important points there. I mean, on my first challenge, when I got to the end, I realised I hadn't done enough wild camping. And so, you know, to every now and then to go into a campsite where there are facilities, and Scottish campsites by and large are superb, or maybe into a B&B or something, maybe once, maybe twice during the trip is fine. But I think when you look back on the challenges, it is those wild camping experiences that are the ones that you treasure you most. The other thing that you said that I think that is very true is to take advantage of the day. You know, I mean, it's early. It's light very early in Scotland, and it doesn't really get dark till maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. So you have a long day to take advantage of. Now, when I'm walking on my own, it's a slightly different experience to when I'm walking with my partner, Kate. She's not quite as fast up in the morning as I am, but I think you're right. To start about 7, maybe 8 at the latest, and to walk through, and maybe to finish about 3 or 4 is absolutely perfect, because that gives you time to set up camp properly, to get your evening meal sorted, maybe to fill in a notebook or a diary, a journal if you're taking that, and to soak in the evening. And of course, there are days when you can walk even longer, and you can finish walking at 8, 9 o'clock at night and you're wrecked. But I think that's right. I think start early and aim to finish early afternoon, something like that. And particularly in wild camping environments, that allows you to just sit there in the evening and just take in this wonderful landscape and appreciate the wildlife as well.
I think the word challenge can be misunderstood sometimes. I think people enter the event and think the challenge is very much like a long-distance race where you really push yourself, you push yourself all the time. Where in actual fact, I think a lot of people realise within 4 or 5 days that the challenge isn't about the distance or the speed. The challenge is about facing up to dealing with either very, very similar weather and conditions or vastly differing weather and conditions, possibly even within the same hour, and mentally still moving forward and still being positive and still getting the distance without it being a race, without pushing yourself too hard.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge no matter what level of fitness you have. And I've done the event when I've been very fit, and I've done it with very little preparation as well. It's a challenge whether you basically stay to the main drover roads, or it's a challenge whether you go up high. I think what is important, though, is to just be aware of pushing it too far, because when you're tired, that's when mistakes happen. That's when you fall. That's when you make silly mistakes over navigation. And so to always have that time in hand to be able to make sure you get that navigation right, particularly when the landscape's a bit confusing or when the weather conditions are poor, and to make sure you don't push yourself, particularly when you're walking on your own, I think these important things. Now, if you're listening to this and you're a very experienced mountain walker, those might sound a bit obvious, but remember, a lot of people who do this event, this is the first time that they've done something of this magnitude before. And you do need to give yourself time and space to deal with the unexpected.
Absolutely. And I think it takes a while for people to lose the fear of their own responsibility, to actually look at it more positively and gain every time something goes slightly wrong, they get experience.
Well, I mean, a couple of years ago, this is the kind of silly thing that does happen with over familiarity or complacency or maybe just plain stupidity, I don't know. But I mean, a few years ago, I turned up at a wild camp spot on the Findorn. And about an hour after me, pulled up a young guy who I'd met a couple of years before in exactly the same position. And we set off the next morning to do exactly the same stretch of walk we had done 2 or 3 years before. And we had to be a little bit careful about which valley we took up into the high hills. And we were chatting away, gossiping, catching up on news, convinced we'd gone the right way, didn't really check the maps as we should have done, because I suppose each of us thought that the other one knew what they were doing. And we ended up, we knew where we were. We ended up taking the wrong path. We ended up quite a long way further west than we should have done, and involving a lot of heather bashing and a lot of, it wasn't a very nice day. So, even if you've been over that ground before, and even if you're reasonably comfortable at navigation, if you don't give yourself the space and time to do it properly, you can end up in all kinds of messes. The good news, of course, is that you are walking, and usually if you've got a sensible route, and if you're a first timer, the vetters will have made sure you do, you can always, catch up or make up time if you make mistakes. But if you push yourself too fast, that's when you get injured, particularly when you're walking alone. You need to be careful about that. And it's when you make mistakes of navigation as well.
I think also coming back to route and people approaching it for the first time that maybe haven't done such a long distance in one go, there's no shame and there's no disappointment if you decide to change your route or pull back from a particular climb if the weather is against you. You just don't feel confident enough to do that. I think that's something that needs to be reassured to people. There's no negativity, there's no criticism at all. In fact, people will probably praise you for being confident enough to make the decision, no, I've got to head back because I just don't feel good hitting this climb in this weather.
I think it is important to be very clear that you're not taking too many risks. One of the things that gives Kate a bit more confidence when she's walking with me, I think, is that she knows I'm not going to do that, really. Just being able to improvise is important. I can remember a few years ago, we ended up walking alongside a lock in the most atrocious weather. We tried to pitch our tent behind a wreck of a wall of a wrecked house. Didn't give us any protection at all. The next day we walked onto a river crossing, and there was just no way that we could have got over that. There was a mountain pass we could have taken, but Kate, being a relatively small person, I couldn't get her over the hill. And so, pretty dejected and feeling pretty miserable, cold and wet, we turned round and we walked back down to the little village of Kenlock Leven and booked into a hotel. And I thought, that's it. I finished that. There's no way I'm carrying on in this. And I really didn't care whether we quit or not. But you sit there, you dry your clothes a bit, you have a warm drink, you get the maps out, and you think, oh, actually, there is another way around there. You can phone the challenge control people who will always get their maps out and help you and say, well, look, if you could do this, you do that. You'll maybe lose a day, or if you go this way, you'll be back on schedule. And I think that's right. The ability to improvise is important. So because that route has gone in, and even if you've got alternative routes planned for bad weather, you need to be sensible about it. And if you're not feeling well, or the landscape's a little bit more challenging than you thought, then, change it. But let them know what you're doing, and also ask their advice as to the best alternatives that are there, because that's what they're there to do in challenge control. And by and large, they're very experienced walkers who know the Highlands like the back of their hands.
The Outdoor Station is your one-stop shop for audio and video entertainment for the self-powered traveller. You can find us online, on internet radio, on smartphones, on smart TVs, on YouTube, on Apple TV, on Now TV, and on Facebook. You can also stream us live via the iTunes app or TuneIn radio app. The list is continually expanding, and for full details of how to subscribe, download or stream and enjoy our massive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk. In this day and age of social media and everybody posting positive images and positive pictures and glorious sunsets, sunrises and magnificent waterfalls, I think it's important to let people know that all of us that have done the challenge, and many other walks, of course, but in particular the challenge, have all had our bad days and bad moments and times we were going to pack it in. In my particular case, I remember one particular day walking, and it was just knee-deep mud and peat, which was horrible enough. But that combined with the sleet and snow and the horizontal wind brought my body temperature down. And then I found I had to cross a river to get to a bothy. And I could feel myself, as I went across this river, got deeper and deeper and deeper, went above my thighs. And I couldn't get I think I had sandals or something. I put sandals on one side. I couldn't control my hands to put my boots on the other side. I couldn't dry off. I was freezing cold and so despondent. And it was hypothermia that was going through me. And I could see the body, but it was one of those paths that if you took a direct route to the body, I would have just gone through more peat, more mud. And so I had to walk an extra half mile round the track to get to the body. And I was beyond low at that particular point. I remember it really, really distinctively. I think it was my first or my second crossing. Anyway, I sort of got the stove going and I don't know what I had, some tomato soup or something and some bit of food. And within half an hour, I dried off, got my wet stuff off, just stood there half naked, had some warm food inside me, dried myself down. And the mental change that I went through was just phenomenal. I came out of there going, right, I don't care if it's still raining, I'm going to get to wherever I was aiming for. I would like to reassure people who are doing it for the first time, that might happen to you, and don't worry about it. Just deal with the moment, sort yourself out, take a time, take 5-10 minutes to rest, gather your thoughts, get some warm food inside you. You will change. It will change everything.
I think that's absolutely right. And you know, I finish each challenge and I take a lot of photographs. And sometimes if I'm writing up a challenge journal, a few months later, I'll be looking at the photographs and I'll think, oh, there weren't many photographs taken that day. Well, that's probably because the weather was terrible and I didn't want to stop and I didn't want to take photographs. So seeing all these lovely photographs of lovely blue skies and the Scottish mountains is lovely, but it isn't always like that. You're right. It can be quite horrific. It's important to take breaks when you're walking, no matter how fit you are, no matter how young you are. If you're walking all day, you know, make sure you take a break. I mean, I can think of one or two really horrible days where I was walking in a very exposed landscape with terrible wind where I didn't want to stop. And, you know, and trust your body. Stop when you're feeling tired. If you're a mile or two short of your destination, that doesn't matter. You can make that up the next morning when you've had a good night's sleep and you've had a good feed, you know, but you can always find somewhere to camp in Scotland. It's never very difficult. So, you know, listen to your body and trust it, and stop when it's telling you to stop. But as you say, we've all had days where, you know, that river crossing has been very difficult, or you find yourself up to your thighs in a bog or something like that. You know, and it's pretty dispiriting. And the other thing I think that people underestimate is when you're going cross country and you're off those paths and you're heather bashing or you know, battling through bracken or something, I mean, it does take it out of you. I mean, you use a lot of energy going across wild open ground, and sometimes we don't appreciate that when we're planning. So again, you know, give yourself the space, use most of the day, and if you need to stop, then stop, because you can make up the difference in the morning.
I think the wild open ground comment also would link to your final camping spot as well. I think we've all fallen foul of looking at the map, now we have Google Earth, I suppose, but looking at Google Earth, looking at the map, they're saying, okay, that looks like a beautiful spot, it's right by a stream there, that looks fantastic, it'll be wonderful, we'll camp there the night. And you build this up in your mind as that's going to be a place, it's going to be 5-star luxury camping. And you get there, and as you say, it's 2 foot of heather, and it's stony ground. And surprisingly, as beautiful as Scotland is, and as varied as Scotland is, the sort of key places when you're actually planning your route sometimes don't turn out anything like that when you get there.
No, that's absolutely right. But even worse than that, the same spot can change.
Absolutely, yeah.
I did, on my first challenge, I had a glorious night's camping just outside of Glendessery. It was fantastic. And Kate and I were back in that area about 7 or 8 years later, headed for the same point. And I said, oh, this is a fantastic camping spot. When we got there, it was absolutely horrible. And whether or not they'd stopped grazing animals on it or something, I don't know. But, you know, sometimes even the same spot that you've been in before is not quite the same as it was. So the ability to improvise and make the right kind of decisions and to change your, if not your route, to change your sleeping spot or whatever, are very, very important. And again, it's just worth reiterating, the more tired you get, the more difficult it gets to do that properly. I can remember 1 year walking with Kate and we got to Glenfeshie. And the previous time I'd been down this glen. I crossed at a bridge which had been washed away. And of course, I hadn't been reading my challenge guidance notes properly, and I hadn't clocked the bridge wasn't there anymore. So we had to walk upstream to get another bridge and come down. It had been a very, very long day. And I got it into my head that perhaps we could ford the river at a certain point. So I sat down, walked into the river, and immediately just went straight in. Stood up, swearing ahead, and looked back at the bank I'd just come from, and there was the most beautiful grassy platform. It was the ideal campsite, but in my exhaustion and determination to get to the bothy, I'd stamped right across it, gone straight into the water, almost drowned myself, and then suddenly realised there it was, So, yeah, you are right. Tiredness, flexibility, all these things are pretty important.
I think it might be interesting just to reflect slightly on the changes now. I did my first in 2004. I think yours was 2005. And at the time, there was no real diaries or recollections that anybody had posted online, because it wasn't, blogs were only just sort of coming into their own at that stage. And in fact, when I think about it, I was still using a film camera, so you didn't have instant pictures, and obviously smartphones hadn't yet been invented as such. So how different it is now compared to then. I'm thinking about the podcasts I've done. I think there's 54 podcasts now, all associated just purely with the TGO challenge as a library. But of course, at the time, I don't recall thinking I had access to any library material.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's a lot easier to plan now. I mean, if I'm looking to walk in an area I haven't walked in before, whether on the challenge or off it, I'll often go back and consult other people's challenge diaries, which give you a clue as to the route, ways they went over, obstacles. And remember, they will have had advice from vetters and other walkers in doing that. So, I mean, that's great. Although, of course, the landscape doesn't always quite look like that when you are there yourself. So, but planning the event has become, I think, a lot easier. It's less of a detective story, I think, than it was in the early days, I think, for me, certainly, if you're looking, what we're both talking 11 or 12 years ago now. So, it makes a difference. But remember, you have to walk your walk, and it's okay saying, well, so-and-so and so-and-so did it, and they did from here to here in 8 hours, and I haven't got anywhere near that. Well, of course, the weather conditions might be different. The ground might be completely soggy as opposed to being dry. They might be a bit fitter than you, or they might just be a faster walker than you. So these things are general guides, and you to help you, but walking at your pace and your ability is the key thing.
I think the other thing that has been very noticeable over the last 10, 12 years has been the change in the general hospitality and the hospitality facilities that have been available through the different little villages and groups of houses that the route may take you through. I'm thinking of Dalwhinnie as one. How the Dalwhinnie Hotel sort of opened and then it's changed again. I think people use a bunkhouse there now. There are various post offices and shops which have long gone. And certainly the facilities that one might assume might be there because there's a cluster of properties doesn't necessarily mean there will be services.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, anybody listening to this who is about to set out on their first or second challenge should be very aware of that. I mean, I remember a few years ago planning to start my walk from Arcaracal, I think, and I checked on the bus timetables, and I was going to get a bus from Fort William that took me to Arcaracal. And for some reason, a couple of days before setting off, I just decided to check it again, and that bus had disappeared from the timetable. So I rang up the bus company. Unfortunately, the bus company was also a taxi company, and they said, look, carry on to Lafayette. We'll pick you up in a taxi and we'll take you there. And so I got off the train at Lafayette thinking, actually, what happens if no one's here to meet me? But, the bus had literally changed. It had been there 2 months before on the timetable, and then it had gone. Yeah, I would always do a little double check in terms of your hotel accommodation and all the rest of it that you planned. as well as that, do your research in terms of shops and things, but just be aware that, some of these community websites are not updated that much. And so that nice little community shop that seems to be just in the right place, check it's still there. And the best place to do that is on the challenge notice board. Does this place still exist? Because there are enough people who are in the Highlands a lot or relatively local who will tell you. But you're quite right. Every year, I think the number of facilities close. It happens the other way as well. But so, for example, Dalwhinnie, which first time I went through it was, for me, like the end of the world, I think. It was not a place I wanted to be in. But now a guy has retired and opened a really fantastic hostel there, does wonderful food, and suddenly the place has become, a much more practical and pleasant stopping place. But, he won't be around forever. So I think you do need to check these things out. But you're quite right. You look at the map and you look at the size of a village and you think, well, there'll be something there. You can't count on that in the Highlands. The sparsity of population and the economy, it's a hard life up there, is making it very difficult for all kinds of businesses to sustain themselves.
What would your advice and tips be, and comments for that matter, relating to the actual cost of the event and how that's possibly changed, but also for somebody that's going and thinking they can survive with a credit card? Do you think that's possible these days?
Oh, I think this is actually one of the most common questions I get asked by people thinking of doing the challenge. It should be possible to do it on a reasonably low budget if you prepare your food in advance, you do food drops and all that kind of stuff. But actually, it is a major expense, isn't it? It costs a fair few £100 to do the challenge. By the time you've had a few nice meals out, by the time you've paid for that B&B in just the right place, even campsites, the ferry crossing, if you're taking Gordon's Ferry across from Drumsrocket to the other side of Loch Ness. And then, of course, there's the meeting in Montrose at the end, which I think you've got to be very strong-willed to avoid spending money at if it's not just sitting in the bar. So, it's very, very difficult to say to people, this is the budget you should plan for, because you've got to be very disciplined to cut the cost down. Now, I know there are people who do that. The people that keep the cost down, they're very frugal when they're in villages or towns. They don't get involved in big rounds of drinking. They perhaps don't do the cafes and restaurants. They maybe go to the chip shop as a special thing. It is a difficult one. I'm not sure how much you would budget for it, I guess, but I think even working on my own, it would be difficult not to carry less than £200 with me.
Oh, yeah, I'd say that's definitely the case. I think it would be worth advising people that they will meet all kinds of backpackers on this particular event. They will meet the ones who do enjoy the social aspect and enjoy drinking, considerably more than the average person.
Some people's budget must be astonishing. They're every time they hit town, they're straight into the bar and they're there all night and all the rest of it. It doesn't have to cost you a fortune, but those campsites I talked about earlier that really are of a very high standard. If you go into there, by the time you paid your campsite fee and other bits and pieces, you'll be probably spending the best part of £20 or so somewhere. So again, that's another reason actually to maximise the wild camping, I think.
Well, definitely. I was thinking of the
because you can't spend anything in the middle of nowhere.
No, true. And certainly campsites. I can't agree with you more. They are very, very well serviced and pretty well 99% of the time beautifully maintained. But the cost of camping, I think my first crossing was £4, £5 a night, and it's now more like 15 or 20, isn't it?
I think so. And last year, Kate and I got married just before we walked across the challenge, and we kind of ambled over, and actually I got a really grotty chest infection, so we did a lot more walking through villages and towns than we would normally do, and of course you go and stop somewhere for breakfast or lunch or something. And it can add up. So, you you can reduce the costs, but you need to be disciplined and focused about it, and you need to stick to it. And I would also say to other challengers, if you're walking with somebody who's doing it on a shoestring, it does become clear. Respect that. Don't push them. Don't pull them into things that they're uncomfortable doing, because the great thing about the challenge is we all look more or less the same in our walking gear, but the range of incomes and the range of people of different backgrounds there is astonishing. So, just be a bit respectful for those that are trying to do it on a shoestring.
When you sign up for the Outdoor Station newsletter, you have the option to give us feedback on our shows. You also have the opportunity to suggest people of interest you would like to hear more about. You can also suggest UK campsites which you feel may be unique, and cottage manufacturers who would appreciate a little exposure to our wider audience.
The Outdoor Station. Sharing the passion, appreciation and understanding for the outdoors world.
Okay, so finally, from your point of view then, here you are 10 years or 10 crossings on your 10th into legend status, I believe is the technical term. Are you looking forward to it? How are you approaching it differently?
Yeah, I am. And it's worth talking a bit about that, I think, because each year is different. Last year I didn't enjoy it at all. And it was mainly because I'd had, throughout the 12 months before, some real problems with my Achilles. And then as that cleared up, I developed this really horrible chest infection, so much so that I wasn't really sure I should be starting. And I wasn't completely confident I'd finish it. And, I changed the route over the first few days to avoid some of the higher mountains, did a little bit more road walking than I would want. But the reality was, it's not an event that will stay in my mind next year. So this year I am looking forward to it. We both of us have had some family difficulties to deal with this year, so we've not been on the hills as much as we can. So we'll take it more gentle when we walk. But I'm injury-free so far. And there's kind of a custom, I think, for a lot of people on their 10th event to plan a route that takes in the best bits. So by and large, we're going across, I'm going across ground I've been on before, so there's not a great deal of self-discovery on this one. I know what I'm going to be looking forward to, and I know where the difficulties are. But, so I am looking forward to this one, not least because last year's wasn't a particularly brilliant experience for me.
Oh, well, fingers crossed everything will be good and the weather will hold for you. I'm sure there's one other question that people would be curious to know, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, actually. Here you are, 10 crossings on. What are the big changes in equipment, in gear, that you've learned and are putting into practice for this particular crossing?
Well, when I planned my first challenge, I was planning it with weight in mind in terms of the weight of the kit that I was taking on board. But I think my base weight is significantly lower than it was then. It's probably now starts off without food somewhere around 5 or 6 kilograms, which is probably 3 or 4 kilograms lighter than 10 years ago. I think kits got more expensive, which I think is a bit of a problem. And that's something people need to watch for as well. There's a trade-off between the absolute, the lightest shelter you can buy and something that's reasonable and sensible. I think kits getting more expensive, and I get a feeling that's a bit of an issue. When you're doing the event for the first time, a lot of people will find if they do it regularly, they'll be building up their kit list over 2 or 3 years, and then it stays more or less stable. And if something works for you, stick with it. You don't have to buy the latest and best thing. For me, I think walking in trail shoes as opposed to boots has probably been the biggest a plus. It's counterintuitive to a lot of people. They don't like the idea of getting their feet wet, but as we've said many times before, the great things about porous shoes is if the water gets in, the water can get out again. and you cut down the risk of blisters. And there's something to be said about these more lightweight shoes where you can feel the ground underneath with your toes as you walk. Certainly feel more secure on mountain climbs and particularly mountain descents. So, gear has got lighter, more technical, but it is expensive. So, I could sit here and say to you, you look at a specialist down producing company like PhD, for example, that produce phenomenal goods that produce wonderful warmth at virtually, negligible weight, but at a cost. And a lot of people just won't be able to go there in their first year or second year of long distance backpacking. So, the other thing as well, I think there's a tendency to feel you have to have the latest thing. People are always inventing little gadgets. I know somebody not a million miles from here who sells a lot of these things, and there's always something that's really good for sticking a camera on top of your walking pole, or a spider thing to stick a camera to a fence post, or whatever it is. And these things all mount up. It's surprising how all these little gadgets add to the weight. So, try and keep the weight down. But again, it's not a competition. Be sensible about it. And, just do shop around. Have a really good look now, because the price of some of this online stuff has got much more expensive over the last few years. And with the kind of the collapse in the pound over the last year or so, we know, don't we, that gear prices in the next year are going to be a lot more expensive than they are now.
Yeah, unfortunately, very true. Yeah, everything's going up between 20 and 40%, basically. So, as you say, the good stuff is good, but it has a good price tag attached to it as well. So, it's unfortunate. But if you aspire to the best of the absolute best, then unfortunately you have to pay for it. However, having said that, I do think there are a lot of very affordable brands offering gear which is sort of 80 or 90% of the way there if you're particularly concerned about weight or whatever, for very good
I think money. There's a lot said about lightweight backpacking, and you and I are probably to blame for a lot of it. So it's probably worth just putting in context. I think if you're weighing your pack, so you're weighing your fully loaded pack, forget food for a moment. If you're weighing your pack, once the weight of all your gear in your pack starts to drop below 10 kilograms, you can tell that makes a big difference. Obviously, if you can get it to 5, then it makes a big difference again. But really, around that 10 kilogram mark, 8 to 10 kilograms, I think, is what people should aim for. Now, you should be able to do that with a range of sensible, reasonably affordable equipment. Once it starts creeping above 10 kilograms, you can tell, can't you? You feel that difference in your feet. So, by all means, get the base weight down, but don't panic about it. You don't have to have the latest shelter. I mean, my shelter, if you see, and Kate calls it a handkerchief. It's made of Cuban fibre, artisan made by Colin Ibbotson. Wonderful piece of design. Not the cheapest piece of kit you will ever use. But you don't need that to really enjoy wild camping and to give yourself a reasonable light load to cross Scotland with.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, actually. I'll reiterate that. I think if when people talk about base weight, what they're referring to is their pack less food, fuel and water. And Andy's absolutely right. I can get mine to be about 8K now. And that's obviously with all the toys I take as well. If I take video cameras and
you do take a lot of toys.
Yeah,
I think we should make it clear to a lot of listeners that those are probably legitimate toys. But I mean, the other thing I would say about that as well is also think about the weight of food. Now, a couple of years ago, when I was going to walk across on my own, but mainly with Humphrey Waitman, those who haven't met Humphrey yet will do so. It's a pleasure awaiting them. And we had a very secluded route in mind, which meant that we wouldn't have really hit civilization for quite a long time. So I think I carried 10 days' worth of food. And with my gear, I just didn't enjoy that at all. So, the food adds up. So if you're carrying, I would say, carrying between 3 days of food, 4 days of food maximum is comfortable. And if you're using dehydrated food, that's fine. Every 3 or 4 days you can find somewhere to buy some fresh food, cheese, rolls, ham, that kind of stuff. It will, it's not going to go off in your pack in that time. But don't carry too much food with you, too many days' food. I mean, obviously make sure you've got enough food to get through your itinerary and you've got maybe a day spare. But it's surprising, isn't it, how heavy food is?
Oh, absolutely. I was just thinking as you were saying that, it's also interesting when everybody gets to the hostel at Tarfside and sits around the table. I think without exception, most people unload the spare meals that they had. There's this mountain of food in the middle of the table of the meals that people haven't had. Yeah,
it gets thrown away at campsites from Bramo onwards, doesn't it? I mean, one of the things that I do, I mean, no, everybody has their own different way of doing it, and there's no right or wrong. I prepare my own dehydrated food, as I know you do, but you can buy it commercially. I will send parcels or packages to campsites every 3-4 days or so. So that stuff is there when I arrive. And touch wood, I've never had a parcel not arrive yet, though I know some people have. And so you try and plan it to keep it low. But then on the other side, I do think it's quite important to use local services where you can. So I will always try and buy something in the local shops, whether it's cheese or bread or whatever, where I can, because, we rely on these places. And I think it is important to put, a bit of investment back in. So you could go across the whole of 2 weeks without buying anything in a local shop. I just think that's really against the spirit of the event, I think.
I think, yes, it's worth remembering that if you still want those facilities and services and the community to be there, it's worth reinvesting in them. The green pound is a very valuable pound in these communities.
Yes, and I suppose, if you're looking at the routes, really understanding where the services are. So a village like Fort Augustus, which is a very common place to cross the Great Glen for first-timers, it's got basic services, but there were 2 food stores there. There's now only 1, I think, last year. So Aviemore is a significant town with everything you'd want in terms of gear and Tesco's and whatever. A place like Dalwhinnie looks quite big on the map, but it's like the end of the world, really, if you go in there on a bad day. So, make sure you know what services are available in those places that you're going into. Because you should, in most of the places like Newton or Aviemore, these kind of towns that people walk through, you'll be able to get access to most stuff. There'll be a little supermarket or a little co-op or something. But just check it out, because not all of them do.
Well, lovely, Andy. Nice to touch base with you and discuss the various changes and looking forward to hearing your comments and diary when you do this particular crossing. I hope the weather's good for you and everybody else, of course. When you get back, let's have another chat and you can fill me in.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Barbara. I haven't seen you for ages and ages, and we need to get back out onto those hills again. But then the final thing I'll say is to people listening to, we do know, don't we, that people do listen to the podcasts that we made years ago, even now. I find it quite strange to meet people who said, I've been listening to you for the last 2 days, describing the route we've got. So I will just say, if you see us along the way, introduce yourself, say hello, come and have a chat, let's get to know you. And because I think the thing that probably is the most underappreciated part of the challenge experience is the comradeship and the friendship, and we've both of us haven't we made friendships that will be life lasting through this event, and so don't be frightened. Come up and say hello.
Well, the best of luck to Andy and to all the other challengers setting off in May 2017 on their crossing. You can check out the 50 plus podcasts I referred to over on the Outdoor Station website, and in fact they've got their own feed as well, so you can download them in their entirety if you wish on iTunes or your other podcast software reader. And as Andy says, many people do download them, listen to them as they're walking across themselves, and then say hi. It's a bizarre situation. Anyway, Andy has written loads of useful information on his blog, Must Be This Way, about the people, places, food and preparation, all associated with the TGO challenge. So do check that out if you want more information. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, I've got shed loads of stuff going on. And there's an awful lot of pressure when releasing and producing a podcast for every Friday. As much as I love to do it, I need to take the pressure off myself so I can get other projects done. So I'm going to release podcasts as and when I can, along with the videos. So until next time, the next podcast, the next video, or the next show we visit, I'll see you then. Bye for now.
It's all about the great outdoors.
Podcasting around the world. Online, on demand,
And always free.
I think it's a splendid idea.
this is the Outdoor Station.
I would just like to say